Buying a home can be one of the most exciting and expensive decisions that you ever make, but what if I told you that buyers can occasionally make some mistakes going through the process that can be extremely costly and stressful? My name is Ryan Gillard at Real Broker, your Calgary Realtor. Whether you're buying here in Calgary or anywhere else in the world, this is a video that you're going to want to pay attention to. I'll go over all of the mistakes that I commonly see in the business and what you can do to avoid them. Let's get into it. Before we begin, I do have some free resources for you to help you go through this process. If you go to my written description or the pinned comment, I've got a buyer's guide that you can download for free, as well as a relocation guide and a seller's guide. And again, all for free. Feel free to check them out. And if you have some questions about buying in Calgary or selling, feel free to give me a call. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Call, text, email, or comment. I will get it and get back to you. All right, let's get rolling. And I've got about 30 plus points, so I'm going to make them in bullet point format just to save on some time. And the first point here is skipping the mortgage pre-approval process. This is a cardinal sin in real estate. Everyone should be pre-approved. And it leads to disappointment. Many deals fall apart because the buyer didn't go through this process. And you're out there wasting your time viewing properties. You might see 30 plus properties, write an offer to find out that you're not approved for the loan. It just wastes everyone's time. And in a hot market like Calgary, this can actually help you out because you can provide the seller with a pre-approval letter, which helps your chances when competing against other buyers. And point number 2, don't overestimate your budget or financial situation. And by this, I mean, I'll ask people, hey, have you had a chance to talk to a banker or a mortgage broker yet? And they might say, you know what, we're good to go, don't worry about it. Well, if you view, say, 30 properties to find out that it's not good, you've wasted your time and my time, and it's just a tough situation. I've had situations in the past where the husband and wife were good, but they co-signed for their child who didn't pay their visa for like a year straight, and it ruined their credit score, and they had no idea about it. And so stuff like that can happen. So it's always best to get the pre-approval done, regardless if you think that you're good or not. Next tip. I would always recommend going with a mortgage broker over the bank just because it's easier to work with a mortgage broker. You can call them, you can text them, they respond right away. Whenever you call the bank, it goes straight to voicemail. You might get an answer the next day or maybe after the weekend. So it can be a bit more difficult to work with the bank. Now, that being said, I've had situations where the bank came through. So they can both be good. I just find the mortgage broker is a little easier to work with. And another advantage of working with a mortgage broker is that they can sell everybody's products. So if you work with the bank, say TD Bank, they can only sell TD products. But if you work with a broker, they can sell TD, RBC, Scotiabank, and many other lenders that you haven't even heard about. So they just have more options available to them. And point number 4, don't overextend yourself financially. It's quite common that if someone is approved for $700,000, they're shopping right up to that limit or maybe even higher than that, expecting the seller to come down when they negotiate, but they're not factoring in unexpected expenses or interest rate hikes. And that's why a lot of people are selling right now is because they bought homes at ultra low rates and they weren't thinking ahead that the rates might go back up. And now they're renewing at a much higher mortgage payment, and it's problematic for a lot of people. And point number 5, not factoring in the hidden expenses that you might not think about at first, such as property taxes, condo fees, homeowners association fees, utilities, minor repairs and upkeep and stuff like utilities. So there's a lot of extra fees that you might not think about when you're initially going through this process. And point number 6, it can be a bit problematic to have a large down payment that's cash. Maybe you're in a cash business or was gifted from a relative and you can't really prove where the money came from. Another reason to have a good mortgage broker to help you out in this situation. Point number 7, beware of going through this process and your credit cards are above the 50% max threshold. This can be problematic in terms of getting approved. So if you are going through the process, make sure all of your credit cards are paid off. It makes it much easier, and don't go above 50%. Number 8, don't buy anything expensive when you're going through the process. No brand new cars, no fancy furniture until you've moved into the property. There are situations where the bank pulls the funding before you move into the property, and you could get yourself into a lawsuit for stuff like this if the seller is relying on your funds to close this transaction and the one that they're buying afterwards. So you can really mess things up if you buy a car or furniture or anything like that. Never have your credit pulled by anyone except for the mortgage person, and just stay away from any kind of large transaction until you've moved into the property. And point number 9, changing your employment status. So maybe you're full-time and then you switch to part-time. This can affect your income and the ratios, so this can be very problematic. A really big one is if you get fired, obviously, that's no good. You might lose the transaction altogether. And lawsuits can happen. Again, like I just mentioned, if the seller is relying on these funds to close on the next transaction and now they can't, potentially you could be into a lawsuit for stuff like that. Another issue is if you're a full-time person, then you switch to being self-employed. The banks hate self-employed people. Like they don't like mortgage brokers, they don't like real estate agents because our income is so up and down. And for those aspiring realtors who are watching my channel, if you are thinking of getting into the business and you want to buy something, I would do it as an employee first before moving into the real estate profession. Just because when you're self-employed, it's much more difficult to get approved for anything. And again, the banks don't care for realtors all that much just because our income is it's a bit wild when you're first starting out. It's very up and down. So if you are thinking of getting to the business, I would probably buy first and then get licensed. Point number 10, getting separated or divorced while going through the process. This can get ugly. This is where lawyers come in. And it's just very ugly. I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I've actually had this happen to me back in 2012 when I first got licensed. I had a couple, they bought a property, and like a week, maybe less than that before possession, they called me up saying they're getting divorced. What do they do? In that situation, they took possession because they were still cooperative. They took possession and they sold it right afterwards. So it can be very costly to do this. And again, it can be very ugly, so I would probably avoid buying a property if you're thinking about getting divorced. And point number 11, I think this is a big one, ignoring the mortgage terms and just focusing on the rate. So there are other things at play here, like say you're making a lot of money and you want to pay down your mortgage early. Sometimes there are penalties for doing that, and you can't even do it sometimes. Or not reading the fine print when it comes to the variable rates and how it might increase and stuff like that. And a big one that I saw quite often in 2015 to 2020 when our market wasn't so good is the mortgage payout penalties. They were huge sometimes. Sometimes it's just like a month or two of interest, and sometimes it's a whopping number. Like I've seen situations where the payout penalty was more than the commission, and it prevented many sales from happening. So make sure to read all the fine print and understand the terms, not just be focused on the rate. And moving forward, that covers like the mortgage end of things. Now let's move on to like starting to view properties and stuff like that. And the next point is not researching the area fully. So sometimes you'll get buyers and they like a property the way it looks online, like maybe it's nice and shiny, but they don't know the area, the amenities, the schools. And so I would actually come to Calgary if you're looking to relocate here, and I drive around and I get a feel for the area. And so what happens, I had this transaction maybe 2 years back in a neighborhood called Forest Lawn, which kind of has a bad reputation in Calgary, not the most desirable part of the city. And I think we went through about 10 offers. And I get the same thing over and over again. People like the price, they like the home. They'd write the offer. The very next day, they'd send us a non-waiver and collapse the deal because they heard some bad stories from their friends. They heard rumors. They just heard negative things about the neighborhood. And they wrote the offer before they actually researched the area. And the next point, kind of similar to the last point, is having too big of an area that you're searching in. So Calgary covers a massive land area. It's a huge city in terms of the area that it covers. And it's quite different. So the city is broken down into different regions, like the inner city, west side, northwest, north central, and so on. And like northeast Calgary is nothing at all like the west side of the city. And so if you're a buyer, if you're relocating here, my recommendation would be to fly out here or drive out here and drive around the different quadrants and get a feel for it. It'll save you a lot of time. I've had some buyers where they've looked everywhere from like Saddle Ridge all the way to Glamorgan, which are like totally different. And we viewed like 60 properties. So if you want to save some time, I would pick like a quadrant of the city, a few neighborhoods, and pick out your top 5 properties. I'd stick to one area of the city because they're all quite different. So I'd pick out your top area is what I would do as a newcomer. And point number 14, make sure that Calgary is right for you. Again, I would fly out here, I would drive out here and get a feel for the city before buying anything because you might not like it. I've had some people from Ontario recently that bought with me last year and they've already sold this year and moved back to Ontario Not that they hated Calgary, it's just we have wild pressure changes, and some people can get migraines. And in this situation, they couldn't really handle it, which is unfortunate. But again, I'd make sure to get a feel for the city before buying anything, if possible. And moving along, let's talk about writing an offer. And the first point here would be not understanding the current market conditions. We could be in a buyer's market, it could be a balanced market, it could be a seller's market. And you might be overpaying for a property, or you might be not capitalizing on the current situation. So it's best to work with someone that has some experience with the different market types we can have. Right now in Calgary, our market is still very good, but I think we are shifting from a seller's market into a bit more of a balanced market. That's my take on it right now. So it's always changing. So it's best to work with someone that has some experience in all different types of markets. The next point, poor timing when they start the process and poor timing when they write the offer. Now, the past few years in Calgary, if you were a buyer buying in the spring market, you got destroyed by the market. Everything had competing offers, everyone was overpaying, and it was a very stressful experience. If you just waited for the summer, the fall, or the winter, it's way more tolerable. And I get so many people that they can't go through this process in the winter. I don't understand why. Like, if it's -10 or if it's +15, like, what is the difference? We're in Canada, it's cold half of the year. You can live your life and operate in the winter as well. There's nothing wrong with buying or selling in the wintertime. Homes are selling in every month of the year, and you will save yourself a lot of headache and money if you buy outside of the peak spring rush. And next up, let's talk about viewing properties. And the first one would be falling in love with the property before thinking about its resale value or if it fits your needs. And so it's quite common. You could be out there showing properties and you might love something about the property, but when you really think about it, does it fit your needs? And a real life example I have of this right now is I have this condo seller who's going to sell and buy a property afterwards. She's selling because I think she's in her late 70s, maybe early 80s. And she doesn't like the steps leading to the C train station that are across the street from her condo. It's a bit too tough for her nowadays. And we're viewing properties, and she loves one of them, but it's a multi-level condo, meaning it has stairs to the basement. And she's almost ready to make an offer on it. And I have to catch her and say, hey, the reason why you're making this move is because you don't like the steps. Do you really want to have steps every single day going to your bedroom? And so it's just good to think about it for a second and really think about why you're making the move before making any offers. And point number 19, not understanding the resale value of the property. Now, there's lots of examples of this. I had a listing way back in, I think, 2016, 2017 in Somerset in deep South Calgary. Had a massive yard, like it was unusual, and we couldn't sell it. The market was tough back then. It was quite different. But I think it took us almost a full year to sell this property because it was very unusual, and a lot of city people, they didn't want to have this massive lot to maintain. It was almost like a country property, but it was in the city. It was just kind of weird. Other examples, I had a listing in Oakwood, and it had an unusual lot, and it was hard to build a garage. You'd have to have it on some kind of weird angle, and it was tough for us to sell that one as well. So just be mindful of things like this if you're a buyer. Other things would be, if you're looking at a condo, I wouldn't consider a ground floor condo, especially in the inner city. I've heard stories of like homeless people banging on windows asking for empties. You don't want that where you're living. I wouldn't consider below grade condos, very difficult to sell. Same with the ground floor condos. You lose half the market, basically. I wouldn't consider properties that are like on busy roads or have a lot of traffic congestion. Those are tough to sell as well. And the last point here regarding resale value is I would be a bit mindful buying in a neighborhood that has a lot of brand new homes that are being developed. Unless you plan to stay there for a long time, it can be a bit problematic when you want to sell your property in say 3, 4, 5 years and there's new builds everywhere. You'll have to take a price cut to compete against those new builds. And I can recall this being a problem in the deep south of Calgary back in like 2016, 2017. Like there were new builds everywhere and it was tough to compete against them. So if you plan to buy in a new area, plan to be there for a long time is my suggestion. And if you are curious where you can find new builds in Calgary, I made a video about a month back where you can find all the new developments in Calgary, and you can find that video by clicking the link. Next up, point 20, virtual showings. So right now there's a lot of relocation business happening in Calgary and the surrounding areas. lots of people coming here from Ontario, British Columbia, and sometimes they just rely on virtual showings, which sometimes that's all you can do if you're not currently here, but it can be a bit problematic sometimes. So I just heard about a lawsuit where the property was virtually staged. The person relocating liked the photos, they made the offer. They never actually saw the property until they moved in, and it didn't look anything like the photos. They were upset, and there's a bit of a lawsuit. So what you can do, what I've been doing is I take video walkthroughs and like video calls with buyers just to give them a sense of what the property is like. So I've been doing stuff like that. But it's still best if you're physically here and you see the property. So if you can, I'd recommend flying out or driving out and seeing it in person, at least during the conditional phase. If you can do that, it is better to see the property in person versus just virtually. Next up is the elements of the offer. And the big one here would be neglecting the home inspection. Where do you even start with this? There's so many issues with home inspections. And so the inspection is to help you uncover like defects. We'll look at like the structural, the mechanical, the electrical, even the cosmetic elements of the property, just to make sure that it's a property that you are okay moving ahead with. And I've had a lot of issues with home inspections. I had one scenario where there was a guy from Saskatchewan. He was moving out here. It was a new property, and he didn't want to pay for a home inspection, even though I recommended that he should do that. I think his rationale, he was on vacation in BC and couldn't be bothered. So when he finally moved in, I think he was angry about some issues with the railing was a bit loose, and it was a new build area, and sometimes the work is not fully finished. But these issues would have been uncovered if he did the builder walkthrough or paid for a home inspection. So stuff like that. I've had listings where I didn't know or the seller didn't know, but there was like mold all over the property. I think we had one in Falcon Ridge where the tenanted basement, the bathroom wasn't vented and the whole basement was covered with mold. And if you're a buyer and you don't do these inspections, you can't rely on the seller sometimes because they legit sometimes don't know about these issues. So you're going to want to have a home inspection for most people. And in this situation, we actually went through about, I think 5 or 6 different buyers until like a developer bought this property. It was on a corner lot, and I think they turned it into like a fourplex or something like that. But yeah, so there's tons of issues with home inspections. And for 99% of the population, having a home inspection can uncover a lot of issues that can save you time and money. And point number 22, don't wait for the very last minute to do the home inspection. So what happens is people submit their offer, and while they're waiting for the green light on financing, they delayed the home inspection because it costs $500 or so, which is understandable. But if you leave it to the very last minute, it can be problematic, especially in a hot market. Maybe there are issues that you want addressed, and the seller says no, and now you're up against the clock, and it can just be very stressful. You're better off to do this right away. It gives you more flexibility. And point number 23, be realistic with the home inspection. I can't tell you how many times I've done an inspection and the inspector says the roof, the hot water tank, the furnace are old and to budget for a new one. They always say this, and the buyer freaks out. They want like a $5,000 price reduction from the seller. They're not cooperative and the deal falls apart. You almost have to go into it thinking about the final price with the seller that includes these repairs and stuff like this, because it's very rare that the seller will come down in price after a home inspection. They might take off, $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever, but it's very rare to get a huge price reduction after a home inspection, unless it's like a major issue that, and the seller is very, very motivated. It's not too common where I get anything more than like $1,000 or $2,000, and maybe it might be like a furnace cleaning or like a fireplace cleaning, but not a major price reduction. So you have to be very, very realistic after a home inspection. It's not an excuse to renegotiate the contract. And I think of it more as like a to-do list, and you might get a bit off after an inspection, but don't expect like a massive reduction. And point number 24, don't expect that a lowball offer will work. So in Calgary, our market right now, the homes are selling about 99% of list price. That's pretty good. So we're in a bit of a seller's market still. I think it is balancing out. Parts of this year, it was over 100%. So that means as a buyer, you have to offer over 100% of asking, or else you don't really have a chance. And it depends on the different sectors. Like townhouses are really hot at the moment. This number is coming down a little bit. I think it might have gone from 101% down to 99%. The worst markets that I've seen, it was like 96%, which is still pretty good. So just don't expect that you can look at a home for 500,000 and write an offer for like 400 and expect that it will work. In Calgary, it just doesn't work that way. Other markets maybe, but not so much in Calgary. And point number 25, this one is for condos and not understanding how the condo corporation works. I hear people say like, why am I paying for this special assessment to fix like the air conditioning or to fix the lobby or the siding and stuff like that? Or the plumbing, like how come I'm paying money to fix plumbing in someone else's unit? Like, you get stuff like that. They just think that their unit is separate from the condo corporation, and they don't understand that it's a communal project and they're paying into it to maintain the entire building. You know, it sounds simple, but people say stuff like this to me, and it just tells you they don't really understand how the condo corporation works. So if you are buying a condo, I would definitely look into how it all operates and understand it fully. And point number 26, not understanding the condo documents. So related to the last point, when you buy a condo, there's a list of like 20 different documents that the seller will provide to the buyer. And I recommend the buyer hire a professional. They're usually like lawyers or accountants. They're good at like spreadsheets and stuff like that. And they will help you analyze the condo corporation and let you know some of the issues. So you'll have like annual meeting minutes, monthly meeting minutes, reserve fund plan, all of the financials and stuff like that. So you are buying into a corporation like an investment, and you have to understand all the documents. So I've had issues, not on my end. I was on the selling end, and the buyer, they didn't want to do a condo review. They bought the property, and then I think it was like 2 to 3 weeks later, there was a big special assessment, and they were mad. And well, I don't represent the buyer, I represent the seller. It was on the buyer to analyze all the documents. And if they read the meeting minutes, they probably would have understood that this might be coming up in the near future. So it can be costly if you don't understand the condo documents. Point number 27, home inspections for condos. Now, this is a bit of a yes and a no if you should do it. But to be safe, I would do it. But just keep in mind that when you do a home inspection for a condo, they can't really check the mechanical room and stuff like that. They're just checking the individual unit, like the electrical plugins, the appliances. But they can reveal some hidden issues with their water camera and stuff like that. So they're not quite as important as with a detached home. But I think I would still do it just to be safe. But you might end up wasting the $500 because they can't do all that much. But again, it's peace of mind, so I would probably do it. Now, when it comes to condos, obviously home inspection can help with your individual unit, but if the building has issues, you will find info about that in the annual general meeting and the monthly meeting minutes. Usually uncover some of the problems the complex is facing. Maybe they're doing some repairs to the siding or the roof and stuff like that. So the inspection will help, but also you want to analyze the condo documents. Point number 28 is outdoor parking. So in Calgary, we get very cold weather, and we also get hailstorms, more so in the north part of the city, but it can happen anywhere in Calgary. They seem to be the worst in northeast Calgary. And if you have outdoor parking that's not covered, you might get hail damage. So if you are buying here, and that's important to you, I would look at underground parking or sheltered parking. And I've had hail damage. It's very annoying. You have to pay the deductible, and you might not even be covered for hail damage. So this is a real thing. I had a buyer that bought last year, and they want to sell and buy something else with a garage. So it is a real issue. You might want to look for something with a garage or sheltered parking. And point number 29, not understanding the title. Now, this is more of a realtor job, but if you're a smart buyer, I think you should still pull the title and understand what it means. Because there are things that transfer to the new owner, like restrictive covenants that control the design of the building materials. If you want to make some changes to the property, that would be on the title. There are easements, there are caveats. So there are things that can transfer over to you if you buy the property. And I've had an issue with this, a really big one in the past. And we had some issues with the title. The Canada Revenue Agency had some kind of writ on there. They owed some money to the government, and there was also a caveat by some person that she knew, and they owed this person money. So we sold the property, and we thought that we had enough time. Except whenever you're dealing with the CRA, things take forever, and we couldn't get a hold of this other person, the caveat on the title, and our possession was delayed almost by a month. So if you are a buyer, you should understand that there could be some issues with the property if you pull the title. It's just helpful, I think. And to To make things worse, we actually had a really poor real estate lawyer. I don't think he knew what he was doing, and it made things a lot worse. So another good point is hire a real estate lawyer, not just any old lawyer. Someone that specializes in real estate can make things a lot easier. Point number 30, you don't want to have possession on a weekend or a holiday just because the banks and lawyers aren't open and it won't work, and you'll have to amend the contract. So it sounds simple, but this is quite common. You could be up late at night doing a transaction, and then the next morning when you're more awake, you realize, oh shoot, we actually have possession on the weekend. We have to amend the contract now. This just happened to me earlier this year where we had possession. It was like a Saturday or a Sunday. We had to change that, and we made it for the Friday. And then we clued in that was actually a holiday, one of those newer holidays in Canada that we just didn't think about, and we had to change it again. But this time the seller wasn't very cooperative, and the whole transaction was a real nightmare. I think that seller was moving into a rental, and the days just didn't work for them. And so it can be problematic. The timing with tenants when they move out. So if you're a buyer and you're moving into a tenant property, I wouldn't be moving into that property the same day that they're moving out, just because sometimes they might leave a mess, and you might want to have an extra day or two as a cushion for the seller to get a cleaner in there or to move some of their stuff out of the property. It might be a bit beneficial to give them a few days if you are moving into a tenant property. Number 32, on possession day, don't assume that you can move into the property early on in the morning. So I've had people with their moving truck outside of the property ready to move in, but they can't actually take possession until the seller gets their money. And sometimes the banks and lawyers are delayed, and sometimes the possession might happen early on in the afternoon. So you could show up there like 9 a.m. and be waiting until like 3 o'clock in the afternoon where you can finally take possession. And sometimes if you have possession on a Friday, which I don't recommend, it might be delayed to the point where possession happens on, say, Monday. So I would avoid having a Friday possession, and I would avoid scheduling your move for early on in the morning. Typically possession happens around noon, but sometimes during the busy part of the year, it can be delayed into the afternoon, and sometimes issues happen. So again, I would delay your move-in maybe the next day if possible. Point number 33, make sure to change your locks. I had a situation maybe in 2015 or 2016, years ago now, where it was my listing, we sold the property, and then I think 3 or 4 days later, my seller came back into the condo because she thought that she forgot something in the fridge. So she still had the fob for the condo entrance, and she still had a unit key as well. And she thought that she could just come back in there whenever she wanted and then check out the fridge. It was bizarre. So make sure to change your locks because stuff like this might happen to you. And the last 2 points here, point number 34, don't get angry at the realtor when the prices change. So we're not responsible when the prices go up. We can't take credit for that, and it's not our fault when they go down. The market exists for a reason, and it's going to move the way it wants to regardless of what the agents are doing. The reason why I say this, I get a few comments here and there on this channel. Oh, you vultures, you're driving up the prices and stuff like that. We're not doing that. We're just helping people interpret what's happening in the market and helping them through the process. The prices will do whatever they want regardless of the real estate agents. And I bring this up because I had a seller, they sold back in like 2020 or 2021. And in Airdrie, at that time, the market wasn't that great yet. And it was a tough sale. And they got angry at me, but maybe 2 years later, they were saying, oh, if we had kept the property, we'd be up $100,000. I'm like, I didn't twist their arm to sell their property. They wanted to at that time. And nobody was predicting that COVID would drive up our prices the way it did. Nobody was predicting that. So it has a mind of its own, the market. It's like the stock market. And again, the agents aren't in charge of the prices. So just be realistic. The prices, they could go up, they could go down. Now, I have a reasonable idea of what could happen with the market. I do keep track of what's happening. Right now, we are in a seller's market, and it seems to be shifting more to a balanced market with more inventory coming. But things take a while to play out. But if I were a betting man, I'd say we're probably going to be phasing out of the hardcore seller's market into more of a balanced market. That's just my hunch based on what I'm seeing in the market. But again, the market has a mind of its own, and everyone can be totally off. And the last point here is I think it's fairly normal to have cold feet when going through the buying process. So if you're a buyer and you talk to your friends and family, they might say that you're paying too much or it's a bad decision. They might just be looking out for you and they might change your mind, but I wouldn't make any rash decisions until you fully think it through. I had one situation a couple of years back now in Winston Heights, and so this person, they wrote an offer conditionally on a home inspection and financing. They did that, they waived all of their conditions, they bought the property, and then they want to change their mind and get their deposit back and crater the transaction, which you can't really do without losing your deposit, and it can get very ugly, very stressful. In the end, she actually went through with the purchase and she's very happy with it. So just keep in mind that it's normal to have cold feet. Well, there you have it. That's my take on the top 35 mistakes people can make when going through the buying process. There's a lot of information in there, but if you are thinking of buying a property, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help you out. You can call me, text, email, or comment. And I've also got some free resources for you in the written description and the pinned comment, a buyer's guide, a seller's guide, and a relocation guide. Thanks again for watching, and I'd love to help you out. I'll see you in the next video.